My name is Jim and I was retired. In this video, we will review what has worked and what hasn't worked in my forced early retirement as we continue to discuss how to fight inflation, part 2. Stay tuned. Last week's reading from the Bureau of Labor Statistics showed that high inflation remains a major concern for those of us in retirement, as well as those who are looking forward to retirement. And if you saw the news coverage wondering whether inflation had peaked, consider that the April Consumer Price Index showed a year-over-year inflation for all items of 8.3%, which was down very slightly from 8.5% in March. Is that a peak? Really? Was this a peak in June of 1973 when the rate dropped from 6 to 5.7 in July, only to keep climbing for the next 3 years at the start of the Great Inflation? Or was this the peak in November 2007 when it fell from 4.4% to 4.1% in December 2007, only to bounce higher and end up 5.5% in the midst of the great financial crisis? Or was this the peak in July of 2021 when it leveled at 5.3% and then fell 1/10 of a point to 5.2%, only to keep climbing in the following months? So I'm not prepared to call a peak. We're likely to see that high inflation will remain until the Federal Reserve increases its policy rate substantially higher than the current range of 0.75 to 1%, where the federal funds target rate range is now. And considering comments from policymakers in recent days, we're likely to see those half-point increases for June and July. They're only going to take the upper range from 1 to 2, and that's still substantially less than where inflation expectations are. The University of Michigan's latest reading is 5.4% for inflation in the near term. Even more ominous, the federal funds rate will be about a point below where the longer-term index of common inflation expectations, which is for 10 years out, that's now exceeded 3% for the first time since the financial crisis. So we're still chasing inflation and not crushing it. Talk about too low for too long. The federal funds rate is way late. Even Bernanke came out in the last day or so and said the Fed waited too long. They should have started acting last fall. Many systematic rules, such as the Taylor rule, suggest that the policy rate will need to approach 4% before we start taming inflation. Meanwhile, we're going to gird ourselves for a continued fight with inflation. I'm calling it the second coming of the Great Inflation. Some of us remember the Great Inflation from the start of our careers in the 70s. Remember the misery index? We're facing the prospect of all of that coming back soon. Hey, by the way, did you like and subscribe to this channel? If you do that, I'll show up higher in the search results. Thanks. How to fight inflation depends upon your stage in life. If you are close to my age, we remember what we had to go through in the Great Inflation. We sucked it up and paid double-digit interest for our home mortgages and hoped that we could refinance when rates came lower. I fought inflation back then by paying down debt, focusing on the highest interest rates. Those were store cards starting out. I had like a Sears card and a Bamberger's card. I think I had one Visa card and one MasterCard. But those store cards were the highest interest rates. And I made sure to pay those down. I still had those revolving credit card balances on the Visa and MasterCard though, until I became engaged and started to get married. And my wife insisted that I pay down all the cards before we got married. And that is a great practice for you to get into. If you're in that stage of your financial journey, start by listing all of the debt that you're paying by their interest rates and concentrate on those highest interest rates first. I shared a video early on which rate rates that included some spreadsheets on how to consolidate debt and pay it off over time. You can get to a point where you can pay down your debt. And at early part, that's a great way to fight inflation. Now, if you're in the middle of your career and want to fight inflation, I'm going to share with you what I did during the Great Recession, the financial crisis of the 2008 timeframe. I was entering my 50s, and I concentrated on building up my cash cushion. I started by saving for the college tuition I had to pay for 2 children to go to college. But I knew that having multiple years, up to 1 to 3 years worth of expenses in cash would help relieve the pressure of inflation or financial crisis or a change in jobs, and eventually an early retirement before I thought I would be retiring. That cash cushion really helps. And again, I don't have to worry about selling equities in my investments when I have a cash cushion. Now, in my case, I also used some of the cash that I had from stock options from my one job as I was switching to my last job in my career. And I decided to use some of that accumulated cash to pay off my mortgage. We had already refinanced from double-digit 30-year mortgage rates to a 15-year mortgage, a couple renovations in the refinancing. But by that stage, I had I would say about 8 to 10 years left on the 15-year mortgage. And I decided that the best use of my cash was to pay off a close to 4% mortgage rather than invest in other fixed income bond investments. Now, I didn't compare that with my stock portfolio, which was struggling back then. If you remember, with a 2008, 2010 range, you weren't going to make a lot of money investing in stocks during that financial crisis. But I wasn't going to compare it to what I could potentially earn on investments in stock, but I did compare it with what I was going to earn in my fixed income bond portion. And I decided paying off the mortgage was a good investment in the long haul. Now, what that did, and I've mentioned this before, is paying down debt, paying off the mortgage, allowed me to free up cash flow to invest in my retirement savings, and allowed me to use the catch-up contributions in my 50s to max out retirement savings. If you are nearing retirement or in retirement, and you've already paid down debt and built up a cash cushion, I use that 3-bucket system, so I have 1 to 3 years worth of cash for my expenses. And if you have that, I'll share with you what I'm doing now as we approach the second great inflation. I'm cutting discretionary spending, going through the budget, and I've got it all broken down so I track expenses and understand where I can cut and where I can't cut. So I'm cutting discretionary spending, but I'm also moving up some non-discretionary spending. We need to replace an aging air conditioning system in the next couple years, and I've decided to go ahead and do that this year as opposed to waiting till next year when I'll pay about 8% more. So pulling forward some non-discretionary spendings in an inflationary period of time may be a good idea. So I am going forward with that major expenditure of a air conditioning replacement now, so I don't have to pay more later. I am taking advantage of the HVAC contractor's offer of a 1-year 0% promotion on the project. So I can take my time to pull out money from my investments strategically in the coming year. But I've read the fine print on this deal, and you know for sure that I'm going to make sure it's all paid off before that promotional period is ended. Otherwise, it's about 18% interest moving forward, and I'm not paying that. Now, food is another non-discretionary expenditure, but you also have discretion in that. You certainly have more discretion in your food purchases than the 477 price checkers who work for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. These people who calculate the Consumer Price Index for urban workers have a defined basket of about 100,000 products, goods, and services. They've done that, and in the April report, thousands of items that come in the food at home category, they've added up and calculated that the food at home went up 10.8% over the last year. But real consumers like you and I can substitute chicken for pork chops or beef. We can make substitutions. We're not set on a rigid basket of goods. Look at the data that's in the CPI for some clues on how you might decide to make some substitutions. So take a look at this chart. I took the April CPI report and I took the full list of detailed food at home categories. I'm showing them here. And then I copied that and put it into this sheet and sorted it by the annual inflation rate. That report reproduces this chart, which shows the food categories. And you can see bananas and apples are trending below the group's major inflation trend, while oranges and citrus fruit are well above inflation. So bananas and apples on your food list and oranges off for a while. By the way, eggs are really high right now because of the bird flu that's hitting poultry farms. So back on this list, you could decide to eat more canned tuna fish and frankfurters, which are seeing less inflationary pressure, and less on beef steaks and veal or ground beef for hamburgers. But those are just the average prices. You could also shop for the best prices and look for the things that are on sale at your favorite supermarket. When you are looking for the best prices, be sure to look at the unit prices for the best deal. Consider this shelf of pasta. Is the best deal 4 boxes for $6 or 3 boxes for $4? The unit prices for the Ronzoni is $1.34. The Barilla is $1.50. So skip both of those on sale prices and go for this best deal from San Giorgio, where the unit price is $1.25. Of course, if you find pasta on sale for less than $1 a box, that's the time to stock up your pantry. Earlier, I shared my tip of buying meats on sale, prepping them and freezing them in the freezer downstairs to cook with the sous vide method. That's in a plastic bag under vacuum. And it seemed like a good strategy. Unfortunately, my 5-year-old frostless freezer by Frigidaire has failed, and I ended up throwing out about $500 worth of food that had gone soft to about 40 degrees in the freezer. So until I get that freezer fixed, I'm going to have to buy bulk of dry goods and hold off on the meats. I'm going to conclude with my standard warning. I am not an economist or a financial planner, so take these as entertaining ideas from one educated consumer to another. Always do your own due diligence and seek out a professional if you need one.